Today we have Sarah Hassaine with us to talk about negotiating for promotion, which is a hot topic. We all want to grow and be valued and recognized for the work that we do. And promotion is a very obvious, clear way of achieving that. But it's scary sometimes, and Sarah's going to share a little bit about her experience doing this. Sarah is currently the head of diversity and inclusion at ResMed, and she's been doing diversity and inclusion for a while. She's also on the board of Planned Parenthood for Pacific Southwest. She's a president of the board of the Kim Center for Social Balance. She's also a Wharton Business School MBA, and she got the award of San Diego Businesswoman of the Year, which must be pretty fun to get. And then she's also involved as a guest writer for the San Diego Union Tribune. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ivna. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
It's challenging. And for a lot of people, when they start their jobs, you're negotiating for a compensation, for promotion, for a job is hard. It's the whole idea of negotiation. People don't even negotiate. What's your experience with that? What happened to you? What was your first time negotiating for something like that?
And I just want to say thank you for highlighting this topic. It's hard. It's hard on any gender, but it's especially hard for women. And data shows that women don't negotiate. They negotiate less. They negotiate for less. And it's really hard for them to find and articulate their value. And my experience, honestly, has been that I am that data point. Listen, I'm 40. I'm halfway through my career, and I'm very proud of how far I've gotten. However, when I look back, I didn't negotiate for a lot of my roles. And I remember when I got into Amazon, this is over 10 years ago, and I negotiated for the first time. They gave me a number and I said, oh, I emailed back and I asked for another number, and they immediately said no. And I said, okay. And there was no negotiation. And I remember even feeling deflated going in. And when I talked to other people, when I got there, people negotiated, and it hurt. Like, why didn't I get that opportunity to have that back and forth, to articulate my value? And I look back and I didn't know how to do it the right way. There's a skill to articulating your value and negotiating. And I had to learn that. And so I did that for my promotions and every move after that.
Interesting. So even when you finally decided to negotiate, you didn't get the result that you wanted immediately, and you realize that there's a skill to it, there's a method. What got you in that moment to decide to try negotiating with Amazon for the first time, since you hadn't negotiated in previous roles?
It's a bit of a personal story too. I had some life shifts, and this happens to a lot of us, right? There are reasons why we have to leave the workforce, and I had some personal matters to tend to. And so I'm going back into the workforce, and I was offered about a good $15,000 less than I used to make. And I was desperate for a job, but I also knew that I was worth more. But there's that balance between, I've been out of the workforce for a year, I need to get back in. And it's unfair. A lot of people get pigeonholed when they're trying to return back to work. And so they're valued at less, when really that does not mirror their capability or their capacity. And so in a way, I devalued myself in the process. I'm like, you know what? I told them this is what I used to make a year ago. They came back with me and said, this is what we're going to offer you. And I really wanted the job. I wanted to get my foot in the door. Now, unfortunately, what happened to me and to a lot of women is then when you come in at a certain level, there's only an incremental increase, right? Every year. And so then you get stuck, and it's really hard for you to end up at where you deserve to be, or where you should be industry-wise, market-wise. And so what ended up happening, to your question, is that after a couple of years, when I still wasn't where I should be, I left because I knew I was worth more.
So you left because you realized that you came in with a not so competitive pay. And then over time, that just gets worse because, like you said, it's hard to catch up with the market.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said, if I leave and go somewhere else, I'll immediately get a 20% increase or 30. You'll adjust to the market value immediately. Yeah. And so that was enough to push you out and looking for another job.
Yeah. And it's the one thing I always say in my trainings, right? So you mentioned I do work a lot in inclusion building and fostering diversity. A big part of my job is making sure that different communities are getting the skills training that they need to be upskilled. And women is a big part of the work that I do. And Women need to learn how to negotiate, how to self-evaluate and self-advocate. And I had to practice what I preach, right? I can't be in this field and not even advocate for myself. And that's a wake-up call where it's one thing to say something and do it, but it's another thing to do it.
Yeah, it's definitely really hard to do it because, and I remember myself, it was just scary.
Yeah, it
And
is.
I feel like men talk a lot more about these things,
Mhm.
and it just normalizes this whole idea of negotiating pay and asking for more. But for women, we don't talk about it. It's taboo, and then we feel alone. We feel like it's not normal. We feel like somehow we're being self-centered, and we feel guilty.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. Men have no qualms, and I'm generalizing here. So for men in the audience, just know that I'm generalizing a little bit. But statistically, men will say, "Hey, I want, whatever, 200,000 for this role." And they have this confidence about it. Women feel bad, they feel guilty, they feel selfish. And in fact, I personally over my career, I have seen for the same role, the same skill set, men ask for a certain role and women ask for 60 to 70,000 less. And that's the exact same role and same skill set, same credentials. And you see how women, and it breaks my heart because is a company really going to come back and say, actually, we want to give you 70,000 more? So that's something also that this is why it's so important that companies and that women really take the time to figure out what they're worth and ask for it and take away the narrative that you are quote unquote being rude, selfish, bitchy, all those boss babes, all these labels they throw on women that they don't throw on men for advocating for yourself.
So since this is something that you promote in your company as well, and especially with women, are there any statistics that you have that could really help women understand that it's normal, it's expected, it's okay to ask for more money? Ask for more money. It's okay.
Yeah. And I want to make sure I understand the question. Are there statistics you're asking?
Yes. Anything that will help the listener gain a better understanding that this is not something, it's not like 1 in 100 people ask for a salary increase or negotiate their promotion. Or how do these things actually happen, and why is it so important that we actually negotiate,
Yeah.
ask for these things?
I'm going to give you a two-part answer. It's a great question, and I'm really glad you asked that. I don't have the exact statistic, so maybe once this is published, I'm happy to put it in the chat for you or something. What I can say is that we know that it's less, right? Data does show that it's less. And there's also other elements you need to consider. One is generation. There's a generation, the older generation, where, baby boomers, maybe Gen X, they'll take what they get and they're content. Whereas maybe Gen Z now and millennials, especially the younger millennials in the range, are definitely more comfortable with the self-advocacy. So you do have the generational component to consider. And then you have race. And there are some within cultures, culturally, some women are more reserved. And it's imprinted in them that you don't ask for things, or that it's just culturally not okay for the gender. And so race, gender, all of this plays a part in it.
It's harder if
Yes.
you have any type of different background, if you're an immigrant, if you're
Yeah.
colored.
And it's now known, right? Women are paid 80 cents to the dollar for a man, but that's for a white woman. For an Asian, Hispanic, and Black woman, it's actually all very different numbers. And the least is a Black woman. I think it's under 60 cents to the dollar. And so you have to really consider when we say women are paid less, they are, but there's a range of women. And then if you think about a woman with disabilities, you think about these different layers. In fact, there's a data point that I just saw for a mother. For every child she has, there's a reduction in her salary raise each year. It's as if there's a penalty socially for being a parent. And so there's that bias that also plays into salaries where we're not going to negotiate with a man, he's here. Whereas with a woman, maybe she'll have a kid or she has a kid. And so they don't place those same labels on men, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've never heard that. And actually, one thing that I've witnessed, my boss once told me that, and I was already employed with him. He didn't hire me, someone else hired me, he inherited me.
Oh, yeah.
And when he was looking for someone to fill in a position, he told me, I don't recruit women in fertile age.
Oh my gosh. Oh,
20 to 40 year
so many
old.
things wrong with that statement. Great. So from, yeah, until when? 55, 60? That's
I don't
horrible.
know what that, it's
That's
basically the entire career
horrible.
of the woman.
That's horrible. Oh, I'm so sorry that you said that. But I was also told by someone once, there's people don't want, they try to do the right thing, but the impact and intent are very different. So
They are. And this was a nice guy. I actually
yeah.
liked him as a manager. But when
Hmm.
it came to this one thing,
Yeah.
and he wasn't old, like he was young.
Yeah.
It's a very outdated thinking. And it happens. That's just
And
how it
it's
is.
not about age. I've actually found this across my career. I have so many, my best mentors and allies have been men. In fact, statistically, women do better under male managers. They get promoted at a faster rate. They get more visibility. So I want to be clear, this isn't about gender, right? But it is about self-advocacy and knowing how to. And then also in situations like what happened to you is, or me in the past, is knowing how to navigate those conversations and making them coachable moments. And again, stepping up for yourself and really just articulating your value. It's so important.
Yeah, and I agree. And you've been learning and developing your own skill in negotiating for growth, promotion, pay, and all those
Mhm.
things. Is there anything that you did that you regretted in the past?
Yeah. So there definitely, I'm going to start with where I'm at now and then go back to what I regretted, because as you grow in your career, you look back, things make sense why I made those decisions and they led me here. I do regret how much I shortchanged myself across my career with salaries. But then it got to a point where I was like, no more. This is how much I'm worth. So the last time I negotiated my salary, I had a number in mind and they came back at me twice. And I just said, no, this is what I'm worth. And it was like this kind of persistence that I've never even seen from myself. But until that point. And so I was so very thankful that in the end, it got matched. But up to that point, I do regret past opportunities where I just took the offer or they came back with something minimal and I just took it, even though I wasn't happy with it. And it leaves you sometimes at night being like, oh, I could jump and go somewhere else and do this, or why does so-and-so make more than me? And it's unfair that I had to go through that mental exercise all the time. And that's not healthy as well.
Help me understand how you know what you're worth, because
Yeah.
I hear that a lot. Okay,
Yeah.
get paid what you're worth. But we all see our worth differently. And I think that men see their worth a lot higher than women. Even if you do market research on pay, their ranges are huge differences
Right.
in ranges.
Right.
So
Yeah, you're right.
how do you know your worth?
Yeah, no, that's it. I'm really glad you asked that question. So there are a couple ways. Firstly, depending on your role. So let's say you're, software engineer in a tech company, you're able to go and look up through different websites. How much is a software engineer in San Jose, California making? And you're able to find your range. That's one way. So you can do industry online research. The second thing to do is look at job descriptions. Nowadays, law, especially in California or other states now in other countries, they are putting the salary range for roles. So you can go and look at the range. Okay, they're putting it at 100 to 150. So then you know where you're at. So that's really important for you to understand from job descriptions and market research. There's also talking to people in the industry. So through your informational interviews, when you're talking, feel comfortable to ask, if you don't mind me asking, what is the range for a role like this? You're not asking for the person's salary, you're asking what is the range for the role. And so I think there's this distinction that I really want to clarify is when you're doing your research, it's not personal to the person, it's understanding the market value and how they see it. And that's the same thing when you're interviewing. A lot of times the recruiters won't tell you right away what the range is. When they do, great. If they don't say, please, I'd like to know what the role is. I get recruiters that reach out for me, and the first thing I say, what is the pay range that you're talking about? So make sure you ask for that.
Got it. So that makes a lot of sense. So you're assessing the pay range in many different ways. And then once you have all these multiple ranges based on what you found on the internet, on the JDs, with the recruiters and the informational interviews, then how do you position yourself in the range? Like, how do you know that your worth is mid-range versus the very bottom of the very lowest range?
Yeah. The ranges are an interesting thing to double click on. I'm hiring you in for this role. and you're qualified, but there's a $50,000 range. And you're just like, why would I get 100 where I could get 150? What I know and what I understand is if you're coming in brand new to a company, there's a huge ramp up period. There's a lot that you have to understand around like the culture, how things work. And so there's that element. There's also like overall experience in that space, in that company, and how things are happen. So there's some of that you have to, that a hiring manager and a recruiter need to take into consideration. And also just how much experience. Sometimes you think you have experience, but really the team knows what you really need to know and what's going to set you up for success. I really encourage women listening, if you are applying for a job with a range, understand if they're offering you something in the lower 30, 40%, what is it going to take for you to get to that higher part of the range? It's understandable. It's a range for a reason. And to explain why we have ranges is because there are a lot of people in that company with that role in that range. And so it's an equity bracket too. So whether it's a leveling, whether it's a title, all of our project managers hypothetically are paid within this range. And so that's also an equitable practice to make sure that we're all following within a range.
Okay. Okay. So here's something that I find, and tell me if this is true, if this is your experience as well. Often, a lot of people are hired for a job that they actually don't have experience in. So it's a level above what they've been doing historically to make sure that they're actually motivated to do the work. Because if they just do a lateral level transfer from one company to another, and they already know the job inside out, then they'll either need a promotion very quickly, otherwise they'll leave the job in the company, or they're just not the right kind of person because they don't have the desire to grow and the hunger to get ahead or whatever that is. So if you're not qualified for the job, but it's a jump for you, do you accept, lower pay in the range, or do you still try to market yourself at like mid-range, in your opinion?
This is an opportunity to also talk about what your priorities are when you're looking for a job or what you're looking for. Not everyone it's about salary. It could be about experience. For example, my Amazon story, it wasn't as much about salary. That wasn't what I was prioritizing. I was prioritizing getting a job and getting my foot in the door somewhere. So for a lot of people, that's a great example of someone who like, you know what, this is going to allow me to grow. I'm going to learn so much. So maybe money is not your top value, right? So you're valuing yourself differently. I'm going to value gaining these skills, or I'm going to value these travel opportunities or this. So there are different ways that you could look at what you're gaining in a role. Also, sometimes benefits are playing into decision making. Maybe you're not getting paid as much, but the benefits are great, or the flexible work or remote work. So you have to look at a job as a package. So maybe you might be being offered less and you feel like that's one, but what else are you getting that's going to help balance that out? I'm getting a lot more responsibility in this role, and I'm getting more flexibility. So these are things to also think about in terms of what is important to you, where you're at in your life, what you need. And that's going to have to play into your decision making. Money is just one metric, right? And that gives us the opportunity here to also talk about when we say negotiating for yourself, it's not just salary. Salary is one thing, but hey, if you need flexible hours, if you need to work every day only until 3, or if you need Fridays off, that's part of your negotiation. Ultimately, what we want to really, I'm hoping all of you leave this call understanding, ask for what you need and ask for what you're worth.
Yeah, and the best time to do so is before you say yes.
Yes.
Because they're willing to.
Yeah. If you're a caregiver, for example, you're taking care of parents or a sibling or a partner, a child, let them know ahead of time of your needs. Let them know of your accommodations. There's no harm in it. And it's good for you to come up front with everything and make that part of your negotiation.
Okay. No, I really like that perspective. What are some of the other things? Have you negotiated beyond pay any other elements?
I love to travel. I have definitely asked for more travel days. I did that actually at my last job because travel is important to me. It's something that's like part of my value set. It's when you think of Sarah, you think, okay, where is she at? Where is she jet setting to? I love it. And so I asked for more travel days.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. So travel associated with work?
No, for days off.
Oh, days
So
off.
a lot of companies on average give 2 weeks, right? Some companies are now doing unlimited. But back in the day, I asked for more travel days. I'm like, I would like whatever, 15 or 12 days off. I asked for more days off.
Oh, you ask for more days off.
Yeah,
Got it.
I bake that into my negotiation. If you can't meet me at my base salary request, here's some other things I want. I want to work from home on Fridays and I would like a couple extra days off a year. I have asked for that. Those are easy to grant, and companies can be very accommodating, if especially because a lot of times teams are set on budget and so they can't maybe give you more, but they can wiggle room other benefits for you.
So is this a conversation that you had with your hiring manager or with HR?
With the recruiter, so usually the recruiter sits in HR, right? So with your recruiter, when they call you or they email you and give you the offer, they expect you to counter offer. And by the way, I will tell you myself, someone who doesn't counter offer comes across a bit as like a weaker candidate, especially if you're going in for a certain role. Show that you're a strong candidate and that you have that skill to go back and forth. So always negotiate.
All right. So you're expected to
They
counter
expect
offer.
it.
And if you don't, you're
They
actually
expect it.
perceived negatively.
It's not that you're perceived negatively. It's just that it's a bit like they're expecting a counter offer. Yeah, they're expecting you to come back and say, what about this?
And is
And
there,
they know what their range is. They can tell you, sorry, we can't. They expect it. They expect a counter.
do you know if there's a good rule of thumb in terms of how much extra increase percentage wise people can put in the counter offer that's not crazy, that doesn't look like.
That's unique to the offer and unique to the role. It's really hard to say, given the spectrum of your listeners and everything, what level, what you're at, what industry you're in. Hopefully they're coming in within a small range, right? Hopefully you're applying to companies that are already valuing their employees. But if they're not, that also tells you something. And that is also a red flag. I actually had this experience. I was interviewing with a company a few years ago, and they know this is how much you value this work, especially in my field. If you're valuing it at that, then I'm not the right person for you. That's the budget that you've set aside for this role. So
Interesting. So that's
make
a
sure
sign for
if they're
you.
really devaluing the role, that's not a good sign.
So in that case, did you not even try to negotiate because it was so far off?
Yeah, it was so far off. Yeah. And they just said, sorry, this is what we have. And I said, I'm sorry too. I really hope you find, based off what their scope of the role and the pay, they were not aligned. So
All
be
right.
mindful as well as that if it is a red flag, don't forget when you're interviewing, you're also interviewing the company. And so how they value you and how they show up for you in negotiation is a huge reflection of how the company operates.
Yeah. And I think just empowering, taking that power back and not seeing it as like they're doing us a huge, massive favor just by
Yeah.
considering us for the job.
No, there are lots of companies out there. We have personally witnessed so much up and down, right? Just the last 3 years since COVID, but we've seen it. Companies want to hiring or spree and then they're cuts and spree. But there's so many startups, so many jobs, so many industries, so many people becoming entrepreneurs. So there are opportunities. It's a matter of being diligent and finding them.
I agree, Sarah. So what's maybe a negotiation of job, salary, compensation that you are proud of? That you said, I did a good job here. What was a negotiation that you did personally in terms of your job, compensation,
Yeah.
that you, not necessarily the outcomes, but something that you were proud of, that you thought, I did a good job in this negotiation?
Yeah, I was really proud of myself a few years ago when I did the exact same thing that I'm telling you guys on this phone call, where I pushed back and I knew that I had nothing to lose. I'm like, I'm interviewing in other places, and this was very different than Sarah 10 years ago, right? Where I felt like, oh my gosh, I really need this job. And so that you have to take so much into consideration. But I had worked so much on myself and my confidence and my self-worth that I got to a point where I'm like, this is how much I know I'm worth. And so we had a back and forth exchange twice. It was full of data. And this is what's really important is companies can't really go against data. So it was like an email crafted around, here's the market value of this role. And here's the value in the state of California. And then also here's everything I'm working on and doing and the impact it's going to have. And so if you're able to tell that story, and I told that story, and so I was met. We went back and forth until we were both content. And I'm happy because it was an exercise in persistence and self-worth. It was data driven. It was informed. It wasn't emotional, actually, at all. It was factual, right? Here's what I can give for you. Here's how much this is valued in the market. And here's how you're going to benefit. And I think that's important to tell that story when you're negotiating. I'm a great software engineer. I'm a great leader. I'm great at accounting. Whatever your strengths are, the company wants you. That's why they reached out to you. That's why you're interviewing with them. So remember that it's a mutual alignment. And I was really proud of myself when I got the offer that I wanted.
That's fantastic. And like you said, you're proud of your persistence. You're proud that you treated it in a very unemotional, data-driven way. And when it's data-driven, it's much easier to remove those conflicting emotions that we have. And you pushed for it because you also felt like you had nothing to lose. Was this a negotiation outside of your company?
No, it was an industry. It was with corporate jobs. Yeah.
Okay. In that negotiation, when you were going back and forth, so that was with the recruiter?
Yes. Yeah, your negotiations are usually with recruiters. They're the ones that are liaising directly with the candidate, and they go back and forth with the hiring manager. But keep in mind, recruiters are told, you can't go above this number. This is where you have to stick. And so they will go back and forth with the hiring manager sometimes. The exchange will usually end after two or three max emails.
Did it ever get contentious? No. And were you ever hesitant to push further after they came back and said no a few times?
In the past, yes. Yeah, I think that's what's good about growing, but in the past, for sure. And my biggest advice now to people who are starting in their careers is make sure you start now with the base that you deserve. I definitely struggled in the past. Young Sarah, I have sympathy for you. I wish that she had, been a stronger advocate for herself.
Yeah, for sure. And one more thing before closing thoughts, which is you said you worked on your confidence and you worked on your self-worth. What does working on those things look like?
It's a process. It's a journey. I had a very traumatic divorce and definitely fell flat on my face for a year. And so it's like a rebuild of myself. And you can still have all the pieces of the puzzle, right? The credentials, the skills, but you still have to piece it back together. And that took some time, but it was a lot of growth, self-reflection, and therapy, reading a lot of self-help books, support group systems that really helped remind me and refine myself in a way, right? And I've done a lot of these leadership trainings, which have really been so empowering for me. I really recommend women to take the time to take women leadership, go to conferences, go to summits, go to courses, workshops that really hone in on certain skills, whether it's find what it is that you need, right? Whether it's presentation skills, whether it's confidence building, articulating your worth, but all of these resources are out there. You can even watch LinkedIn Learning now, and there's so many resources, or listen to awesome podcasts like Amplify Voices. And I'm all about empowerment. Every morning I start my day with some sort of TED Talk, something that's really going to help me continue moving forward and growing.
I agree. I think that daily, like you do daily, right?
Yeah.
Level of just getting your mindset in the right place and learning these different strategies can make a huge difference. And it seems like it did for you. And those are lessons like negotiating compensation and positions is something that once we learn, we can keep applying over and over again and really multiply the impact of that. What is something that you want to leave our listeners with today in terms of their takeaways or a next step that they can take?
I have a few, actually. For those listening, if you are in a position where you're going to look for a job or you're in the process of negotiating, understand where your role is at. Market value is so important, and understand what the value you're bringing, and write that out. Understand what it is you're bringing so that you can articulate it yourself when you are negotiating. And so that's so important for you to understand your worth and what you're contributing in your next role. And remember that you're interviewing just as much as they're interviewing you. And you have your lowest that you'll accept. And that's really important to remember. You don't want to go beneath that. You won't feel good if you do. And remember that there are other ways to negotiate outside of money, right? So there are other things that might matter to you, whether it's days off, whether it's time with your families or friends, or thinking through what are your needs. That's also part of your negotiation.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to establish that minimum number before you get into negotiations, because
right?
otherwise they can brainwash you for us to go down.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, this has been fantastic, Sarah. This is such a important topic.
Yeah, thank you for creating this space for all of us to come together and listen and grow together. This is part of everyone's growth and development, so I appreciate it.